The May 1999 pilot of SpongeBob SquarePants aired after the Kids' Choice Awards and quickly became one of Nickelodeon's highest-rated programs. It pulled in a large adult audience alongside children. College students organized viewing parties. By the early 2000s, it was among the network's most-watched shows across all age groups, something its creator never predicted and a children's cartoon almost never achieves. That show is gone. What replaced it is a character who follows his neighbor around in a creepy way. A best friend who started acting more like a bully, and gross-out content that feels less like cartoon humor and more like a writer asking what the youngest possible viewer would find funny. The changes match the franchise's push to make more money so closely that it is very hard to tell the difference between the show drifting on its own and someone deciding to point it in a new direction. The show changed in ways that strongly suggest the people in charge started caring more about how much content they could produce than how good it was. This is not the story of a show that got old and lost its touch. This is the story of a network that realized it had something rare and special, and then made decisions that put making money ahead of keeping what made the original work. The proof is sitting right there, in production records, viewer numbers, and the public statements of the people who actually built the show. Subscribe now before this gets to the specific episodes where the damage is most obvious, because what happened to Squidward in seasons 6 and 7 is the clearest single example of how the show's sense of right and wrong got flipped, and that section alone will change how you remember every episode you grew up with. Steven Hillenberg told them exactly what would happen. Steven Hillenberg was a marine biologist who became an animator. That combination is not a small detail when it comes to understanding what SpongeBob was in its first 3 seasons. He spent years teaching at the Orange County Marine Institute before going to Cal Arts to study animation, and the characters he developed from his educational comic, The Intertidal Zone, carried that background. Grounded, built on how real sea creatures actually behave, and centered on a core idea he gave to the Associated Press in 2001. SpongeBob is an innocent in a world of jaded characters. That sentence is the entire blueprint for the original series. SpongeBob's sincerity was not just a personality feature added to a basic cartoon character. It was the engine that made everything run. The reason the show could be genuinely funny to adults and genuinely easy to enjoy for children at the same time. Hillenberg understood that innocence in a world full of tired, cynical characters only works as long as the world around it stays that way. The moment the whole show becomes cheerful and simple, there is nothing to push against, and the humor falls apart. When he stopped production in 2002 to make the 2004 movie, his plan was clear. The movie was meant to be the ending. He publicly said he was worried the show would get worse if it kept going, and told the Washington Post the show had already said everything it needed to say. Nickelodeon decided to keep going anyway. The franchise had become one of the most profitable things Paramount had ever owned, bringing in tens of billions in merchandise money. Hillenberg stepped back after the film, while creative control moved away from the person who created it. He gave the showrunner role to writer and storyboard director Paul Tibbitt, and stayed on in an advisory role where he could look at episodes and give notes. But the day-to-day decisions now belonged to someone working inside a network whose financial goals did not match the vision Hillenberg had built. The changes that followed were too consistent and too pointed to be random. Many of them lined up directly with the franchise's push to grow bigger and sell more, what the original show was actually doing. SpongeBob SquarePants did not use written scripts. According to writer and storyboard director Luke Brookshire, stories were developed by a small team of writers who put together a 2-page outline, which was then handed to storyboard directors who built the full episode, including most of the dialogue and jokes during the drawing process. Hillenberg compared this to how cartoons were made in the early days of animation. It was slow, required a lot of effort, and produced comedy that came from how the characters behaved rather than from someone sitting down and writing jokes. Tom Kenny described working with Hillenberg in a 2004 Fresh Air interview. Some days were like doing math. Every small detail already planned out by Hillenberg in his head. Other days, he would completely let the cast go wherever they wanted. That combination produced episodes like Band Geeks, where Squidward's need to be recognized as an artist drives the whole story. SpongeBob and Patrick get in the way in funny ways, and the sweet victory ending feels earned because the whole episode built toward it honestly. The song itself, David Glenn Isley's track from the Nickelodeon Music Library, was something the writers found by taking their time time and stumbling onto it. Episodes like Band Geeks needed a level of time and creative focus that becomes very hard to keep up when you are producing a large number of episodes every season. Chocolate with Nuts from season 3 works the same way. Written by Paul Tibbitt and Kaz, every joke in the episode runs on the idea that each character is operating from their own specific and completely believable internal world. The guy who keeps showing up in different disguises to trick SpongeBob and Patrick. The woman who screams about chocolate like she has been waiting her whole life for the chance. None of these land if you think about them as jokes a writer thought up at a desk. They only work if you think about them as things that a real character living in a real world would actually do. That is what the show's drawing-based process was built to produce, and it is the first thing that stops being possible when the production speed increases. The show also worked on more than one level at the same time. On the surface, it was silly physical comedy for children. Underneath, it was character-based humor that adults recognized. Squidward as the failed artist, surrounded by people too cheerful to understand what he was going through. Mr. Krabs as the boss who sees everything in terms of money. SpongeBob as someone whose genuine excitement sometimes makes life harder for the people around him. Keeping both of those things working at the same time required writers with real experience and a specific feel for the show. Many of the original writers had left by the middle of the series run, and the difference showed up almost right away. The audience was deliberately changed. Hillenberg was very clear about who he thought would watch his show. He expected, at best, a small group of college fans. When a large adult audience showed up alongside children, the show's identity became obvious. It worked for everyone because it operated on multiple levels at once. Moving away from that after season 3 was not purely a creative decision. It lined up directly with what made the most financial sense. A show aimed at very young children is simpler to produce in large amounts, needs fewer experienced writers, and sells more toys because young children are a more reliable market for products. The merchandise money was already very large. Aiming the show younger made it fit better with a strategy built around selling as many products as possible. The character's voice shifted noticeably in later seasons, and many viewers felt it made SpongeBob feel less interesting. The original voice had something sharp underneath the cheerfulness. It made him feel like someone whose excitement was genuinely a lot to handle for the people around him. The later voice moved towards something simpler and more bubbly. That fits the way a children's brand character is usually presented. Then the number of episodes produced grew significantly. By 2011, SpongeBob made up a large portion of everything Nickelodeon aired, and producing that much content likely cut into the time available for the slower, drawing-based process that defined the original run. What replaced it was louder and faster, gross-out scenes, drawn-out injury sequences, over-the-top physical gags. All of these are faster to write and easier to produce visually because they do not need the careful pacing the original show's quieter scenes required. The Splinter from season 6 is probably the clearest single example. An entire episode built around a graphic Splinter injury with no real character work underneath it. In the original series, that same amount of screen time would have been used to build something with the careful structure of Chocolate with Nuts. After season 5, it was used to gross out the youngest viewer in the room. Viewership dropped significantly in the years after the show's peak. By early 2012, Disney Channel had beaten Nickelodeon among children aged 6 to 11 for the first time since Disney Channel launched in 1983. The network did not respond by fixing the creative direction. It responded by putting even more SpongeBob on the air, trying to make up with volume what it was losing in quality. What they did to Squidward reveals everything. Squidward Tentacles is the most carefully built character in the original series. He is an artist without real talent, and the show is not being mean about this. It is being honest. His paintings are not very good. He plays clarinet badly. The humor of Band Geeks is that SpongeBob has to step in to make the band actually work, and Squidward's win at the Bubble Bowl is not really a victory of his own skill. It is everyone around him rising to a moment that he himself could not create. The show treated his wish to be recognized as something real and worth caring about, even when what he produced was not good enough. Holding both of those things at the same time required writers who could carry two opposite ideas without dropping either one. The post-movie era replaced this with a pattern where episodes increasingly used a character being made to suffer over and over as the main source of humor. In Choir Boys, Squidward is auditioning for a choir he has actually prepared for. for. SpongeBob's presence costs him his spot, and SpongeBob ends up in the choir instead. In Boating Buddies, Squidward ends up in a boating class he never chose to be in, and the episode is just him having to deal with SpongeBob for its entire run, with nothing resolved at the end. In Squid's Visit, SpongeBob copies every detail of Squidward's house to get him to come over. Squidward's actual house burns down because of this, and the episode ends with him having nowhere to live. The way the show handled cause and effect shifted clearly here. In seasons 1 through 3, bad things that happened to Squidward were almost always connected to something he chose to do. His arrogance, his dishonesty, his refusal to treat other people with basic respect. In Squilliam Returns, he lies about owning a restaurant and spends the episode trying to keep the lie going. The discomfort comes from his own choice. In the post-movie era, characters started getting bad outcomes regardless of anything they had done, and Squidward was the most consistent example. He does not need to do anything wrong. Just being near SpongeBob is enough. That could only happen because SpongeBob himself had been made simpler and more purely good. A simpler, purely good character cannot be shown as being responsible for anyone else's pain, so all of the blame for conflict had to be moved somewhere else. Making SpongeBob purely good matched what a franchise character needs to look like on a product. A purely cheerful face works better on a lunchbox than one that sometimes accidentally makes things worse for the people around him. Patrick's transformation was the most obvious change. Patrick Star in seasons 1 through 3 is more carefully written than most people give him credit for. His lack of intelligence has layers. It is not the same in every scene. There are moments spread across the original run where he says something surprisingly true, and the humor comes from never quite knowing when those moments will show up. More importantly, the original Patrick's mistakes come from honest confusion. He is not smart enough to understand what his actions lead to, but he is not cruel enough to want bad things to happen. The friendship with SpongeBob feels real because the show treats it as real. Patrick's personality in later seasons is often seen as more mean compared to how he was written earlier. In Stuck in the Ringer, he glues SpongeBob inside a ringer, and then, when SpongeBob is upset about it, tells him the problem is his attitude. In Yours, Mine, and Mine, he eats a toy they were both given and refuses to share. In both of these cases, the behavior reads as something Patrick chose to do, not something he did because he did not understand the situation. That is a meaningfully different character from someone whose mistakes come from genuine confusion about the world. Compare this to the Patrick in Valentine's Day from season 2, where he becomes convinced SpongeBob forgot his gift, and the growing panic throughout that episode comes entirely from real hurt feelings. That version of Patrick makes sense as a real person. He has feelings, expectations, and the ability to feel let down. The later Patrick, who tells SpongeBob his attitude is the problem, after causing the situation himself, is not coming from hurt feelings or confusion. He is coming from selfishness, which is a simpler motivation that does not need any careful upkeep across episodes. The production pressure is visible in why this happened. Writing a not smart but kind Patrick takes careful work across many episodes, keeping track of exactly what he understands and what he does not, making sure it stays consistent with who he has always been. The increased number of episodes being produced likely cut into the time available for that kind of careful work. A version of the character who creates conflict simply by being selfish is faster to write, and when a production is moving fast, the faster version wins. The show lost the friendship that made it worth caring about as a result. Hillenberg returned, then he died, then they did what he would have hated. In December 2014, Hillenberg came back to SpongeBob in an active role. According to Vincent Waller, he was part of every stage of production after returning, every recording session, every writing meeting. His presence lines up directly with the partial improvement in quality that fans and critics noticed in the second half of season 9. The characters started acting more like their original versions. Some of the internal sense of the show came back. In March 2017, Hillenberg was diagnosed with ALS, a serious disease that damages the nervous system and over time takes away a person's ability to move and speak. He stopped coming to the studio in August 2018. He died November 26, 2018, at 57. In February 2019, incoming Nickelodeon president Brian Robbins announced SpongeBob would stay in production for as long as the network exists. Not as long as it is good, not as long as the creative team has something meaningful to say, for as long as Nickelodeon exists. That That is a financial statement said in public, and what it reveals about the priorities is hard to miss. Also in 2019, the spin-off Camp Coral was announced, a younger SpongeBob at summer camp. Hillenberg had said in multiple interviews over the years that he did not see much point in SpongeBob spin-offs, which made the announcement stand out. He was specifically against making SpongeBob into a younger child version of himself. Paul Tibbett, the person Hillenberg had trusted enough to hand his job to, posted publicly that the decision was greedy, lazy work by executives, and that Steve would have hated it. A note came out later that Hillenberg had been told about Camp Coral before he died, though everything that came after it still matched exactly what he had resisted throughout his time running the show. The franchise now includes Camp Coral, which ran from 2021 to 2024, and The Patrick Star Show, which is still being made. Both were started after his death. Both were built on the financial thinking he spent his career pushing back against. The pattern across those 2 decades is clear enough to follow. Every time Hillenberg was present and involved, the show moved back toward what it was originally built to be. Every time the network worked without him, the show moved toward whatever helped sell the most product. Many of the changes to SpongeBob since 2004 lined up closely with the push to grow the franchise as large as possible. Every major production decision, more episodes, younger target audience, simpler characters, spin-offs, followed the growth of a merchandise business that became one of the most profitable operations in Paramount's history. Hillenberg made something. The network turned it into a product. Those are 2 very different things, and every scene from the later seasons that made you feel like something was off exists somewhere in that gap. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.